Speaker.
Julian Ginter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to take a call on the Taxation, Transformation, First Phase, Simplification and Other Measures Bill. The Green Party, of course, supports this bill. It's largely non-controversial. It's certainly nothing earth-shattering. It makes a number of small administrative changes about the tax system, which will hopefully result in it being a bit simpler and enable government departments to work more effectively through sharing information. I have to say that I really agree with what my colleague Grant Robertson said earlier tonight, though, that the name of it suggests that it could be doing quite a bit more. Obviously, transformation and simplification would be quite welcome, I think, by many members of this House when it comes to the tax system. I can speak on behalf of the Green Party. A simpler, fairer tax system is one way that we can address the two major challenges that are facing us: growing inequality in this country and climate change. And changing the tax system, making it simpler and fair, is one way that we can reduce the growth in the gap between the very rich and everyone else, but especially those who are doing it incredibly tough right now. And it's another way that we can send signals to business and consumers and transition to a cleaner, smarter economy, one that's not going to leave us susceptible to the challenges of climate change. So we can reduce fossil fuel use, we can reduce pollution. All of that can be done through the tax system. And of course, that is a challenge that unfortunately our national government has completely failed to take up in their nearly 8 years in government. All they've done with the tax system is tinker around the edges. And I have to say that, the work on this bill was done by officials. It's good work. Nothing to criticize other than there are some omissions. But ultimately, the officials' priorities are determined by the government of the day. And it's interesting because last week, we heard from the Prime Minister that the IRD hadn't been able to progress changes to the rules around New Zealand foreign trusts to avoid the use of New Zealand as a tax shelter by individuals who live overseas because the IRD had other priorities. But I think that's really shifting blame, because it is the government of the day who directs the officials in what their program of work should be, determines their priorities, and gives them the resource to be able to undertake that work. So I'd say that certainly something that's missing from this bill, which would be very appropriate given all of the news around the Panama Papers in the last week and a half, would be amendments that would simplify the work that the IRD would have to do and does have to undertake if and when other countries request information from us about New Zealand foreign trusts. Because at the moment, the situation is thus. We've got these New Zealand foreign trusts, and somebody who doesn't live in New Zealand, doesn't earn money in New Zealand, can set up a foreign trust, which they can use to hide assets and avoid paying tax or even worse, criminal activities. Of course, there are legitimate purposes for these trusts as well, but because of the secrecy around them, it is inherently attractive to those who would want to hide criminal activity or avoid paying tax in their home country. And last week, the Prime Minister claimed that there was full disclosure, there's no problem to change it, and that IRD was collecting or requiring the trusts to keep all of this information. But what he didn't say is that unless the other country is Australia, if any country of the world was to ask us for information about foreign trusts that have been set up in which the settler is resident in their home country, the IRD would not be able to give them that information because the IRD does not collect the information. They'd have to go through 12,000 New Zealand foreign trusts that are registered here. You can imagine that huge burden of bureaucracy. It would actually be impossible for us to effectively share information with other countries, even those who have a double tax agreement with us. Of course, there's about 40 countries that have a double tax agreement with New Zealand. Another 12 have some information sharing arrangements with us. But fundamentally, because of the nature of the New Zealand Foreign Trusts and the information collected by IRD at the point at which they are set up, the only information that needs to be given to the IRD is the name of the trust,
come back to the bill.
which may have no bearing whatsoever on who the settlor is or what the activity is, or even the date that it's been settled.
Back to the
so
bill.
one way this bill could be improved, because it is transformation, first phase, simplification, and other measures, it would be to have provisions in it that set up more complete disclosure and a registry so that when the IRD collects that information, then it would be much easier for them to share information with other countries and prevent tax avoidance and other criminal activities. And I'm sure that is something that New Zealand would want to be doing. I mean, the Prime Minister himself said that we're working with the OECD, we're trying to crack down on people who are avoiding paying tax here in New Zealand. Although, unfortunately, of course, we've heard it just in the last few weeks as well, that the government has no idea whatsoever how much tax it's missing out on from multinational companies who avoid paying tax in New Zealand. We've had estimates from anywhere from $500 million a year to $1 billion a year, potentially more. Now, this is a lot of revenue that this national government has simply failed to prioritize, while just earlier today we were going through the committee stages of a bill that is setting up a regime, amending the student loan scheme so that we can get more information about people who have outstanding student loans and are living overseas and chase down the money that they owe the government, those students, rather than chasing down the revenue that's owed by big multinational corporates who earn huge profits. So I think that something about, what is missing in this legislation and what has been talked about in the House earlier in another bill that we heard at the same time, really demonstrates the priorities of this national government. Ultimately, they are protecting the status quo. They're tinkering around the edges, but fundamentally committed to an economy that is unfair and unsustainable.
Order. I'll just remind the member, she can be seated while I'm speaking. This is not a general debate speech. It's specifically about this bill in relation to taxation. The fact that she spent some time talking about what it isn't does not actually address the bill. So I'd invite her to come back to the bill, please.
Mr. Speaker, point of order.
Point of order.
I think that of all the speeches that we've heard tonight on this bill, mine is straying no more from the bill than any other speech.
Well, that isn't the point. The point is that the Speaker has asked you to come back to the bill. The fact that you're saying that you're sitting to a lesser degree than what other speakers have doesn't bring your speech into order. The fact that I may have gone to sleep while somebody else was giving their contribution doesn't necessarily allow you to have a similar amount of lack of attention from me. So please come back to the bill.
As I said, the Green Party will be supporting this bill. It doesn't make any radical changes to our unfair tax system, which the National Party is continuing to support. And with all the different issues that have been in the news in the last few weeks, I do think that the national government should be rethinking its priorities and looking out for average New Zealanders, looking to make changes to the tax system, which are actually going to deliver a fairer, greener society here in New Zealand.